Welcome to the Fearless Females Voice podcast, where women's stories and experiences are shared in order to empower and inspire others. On this episode, I am joined by Elisa Graff, who I met on a workshop, which I am currently on. After reading more about Elisa, I knew I had to get her on this podcast, as she had lived a full and vibrant life of which she had made many fearless decisions. Elisa grew up in California and after starting a family, decided to move to a new city and travel the world. She started a meditation group and built a strong community around her, and she now lives in an eco-village in Germany. Elisa talks to us about her traveling lifestyle, how she relocated her family, built a community, and her connections to life and others through meditation and spiritual practices. Elisa is very focused on living a purposeful life, and this shows in her feeling happy and content. I found this podcast extremely interesting, and I learnt a lot around spirituality and also looking after yourself. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Tell me, what does being a fearless female mean to you?
Well, I don't know. I never think of myself too much as fearless, although I've had friends or family who think that I have engaged in things that they wouldn't necessarily do. So in some respects, I guess I have some fearless quality about myself. I don't really think of myself as a fearful person directly, but I think it's as I said, it's a challenging experience to be a woman, even in this time, even after so much has changed. I think back to earlier periods, my mother's generation or my grandmother's generation, and how dramatically things have changed for us, and how lucky we are to be born at a time when women have as many opportunities as they do. It's so easy to take it for granted, right? It's so easy to just feel as though, oh, it's always been this way. We've always had the opportunity to vote, to go to college, to have careers, to try and balance both family and career. I mean, all those were options in my generation. And it's easy to forget that it wasn't that long ago that those things weren't there for women to choose. You know, my mother's generation, it was like when you graduated from high school, at least where she lived anyway, the option was to be a nurse or to be a secretary. Those are the two options, you know? And so I think I'm very grateful. Also, I have a daughter, and she is now 25. Yeah, she inspires me a lot because she's so courageous about just being who she is. And she's so connected to communities all over the world and all the things that she's interested in. Really, I'm totally inspired by my daughter because she grew up in a co-housing community. We actually developed and we built a co-housing community with 29 other families in California. With the idea, it was always our idea, my husband and I, when we met, we really knew something about this concept of co-housing, which actually is a Danish idea. It's an architectural concept. And it became really well known in the United States back in the late 80s because these two architects from Berkeley went to Denmark and studied it. And now it's been around in Denmark for about 40 years and 30 years in the US. But they came back and wrote a book that spawned about 150 co-housing communities across North America.
Wow.
And it was very inspiring. So we knew about that. And we were actually considering the idea before we had kids that we would like to do something like that, maybe with my husband's college friends. So we explored it for about a year with everyone, but nobody was really ready in their 20s to make a decision about it. They were all going off to grad school or starting companies. And so we kind of put the idea on hold, and we moved from California to the East Coast so my husband could take up, he was starting a business. So we moved to Albany, New York. And some people would say, that's crazy. Wait a minute, you started a family. We already had a 1-year-old at the time, and our mid-20s, and we left everything and left our community, left our family, you know, all the people that could support us as we were starting this journey of having a family. And we moved to a place where we knew no one. And my husband and I both are really good at that. He's actually German, and he came to the United States to go to high school because he was on the German national basketball team.
Assuming he's really tall.
He's 6'9". He's six, he's
Wow.
2 meters 4, 2 meters 4. So he's very tall. But he ended up getting recruited to go to Princeton University, and then he ended up giving up basketball altogether because he fell in love with academics. But so he kind of also started off on this track of moving around and not letting it stop you. And a lot of people that I know from high school, for example, would have never moved across the country to leave California for the first in the first place, but to go to college and stay and start something somewhere else. So then after college, my husband and I met in California because he moved to the West Coast to be involved with Silicon Valley because he studied IT. And we met in a Japanese class, Japanese language class. And we ended up, we've had a really amazing marriage, almost 30 years. Actually, this year it'll be 30
Wow,
years.
congratulations.
Yeah. And we've moved around a lot. We took our family first to New York from California, and then we moved back to California, and then we moved across the world to Europe when our kids were teenagers. And so I guess in some respects, people would say that makes me fearless. I don't know, maybe it makes me clueless. I don't know. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm adventurous. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I guess that in some respects, it's that adventurousness that I actually consider might be one of the hallmarks that makes me fearless. But everybody obviously has lots of fears, and there's still things we're all working on. And this podcasting course has been kicking my butt because I'm in my 50s and I'm still trying to sort of figure out what my voice is and where it's going, what I want to say with it.
So you mentioned that you're inspired by your daughter. And yet I'm pretty sure that she will be inspired by you or has been inspired by you as well. You said that you've done lots of adventuring and you've got so many stories to tell. So can you tell us more about you moving around different countries? Like that's a big step, moving from one place to another, especially with a young family. And from what I hear, people always say, oh, that's not really possible. There's always that restriction for women to be like, oh, if you have a kid, you're going to be stuck at home looking after the baby. There's nothing really, you can't travel, you can't live abroad. So how did you manage all of that?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, when I didn't expect to start our family as early as we did, actually, I was 25 when I was first pregnant, and I had a great job. I was working for a big Japanese company, Hitachi, in Silicon Valley, and I really it was hard for me to actually leave that, but it was really clear to me that, I mean, in the United States, especially in California, every state has its own laws, but you're not supposed to stay home longer than 6 weeks with your child after they're born.
No.
You have to go back to work. And so you have to just farm the child out. You have to put them in daycare from the time they're 6 weeks of age if you want your job back. And
Oh,
so
wow.
that was just not appealing to me. And I decided that I was just going to have to stay at home with my kids. And I'd actually spoken about this earlier with my husband and told him that once we decided to have children, I really felt that that was important. And my husband's an entrepreneur, so he worked 16-hour days for a decade or more with his first company. So, we kind of polarized, he was work and I was home, home life. And, you could say that there are a lot of women in my generation who never would have put up with that. But I just felt as though if you're going to have children, you should give them all, the benefit of your attention, the benefit of your time. I didn't feel comfortable just having them go to daycare for 8 hours a day from the time they were that small. And so actually, I really enjoyed the time I was home with my kids. And when we moved to New York, it was actually a really big shift. And I had a lot of lonely periods there because I really didn't know anybody for a long time. And after we moved there, so it was just me and the baby at home. And then finally, over time, I didn't expect us to stay as long as we did. We were there for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
And but I actually started branching out. I started a meditation group at my home. And that was in 1994. And I met a lot of wonderful people through that. They just came. And in the very beginning, I was a little worried about it because I thought, I'm just inviting strangers into my house to meditate with me. And my husband's not even home a lot of the time because he's working late hours. But it turned out to be a wonderful thing. And I met a lot of wonderful people through that. And then introduced me to other people. And then my son started to go to school. We put him in a great Montessori school. And so we developed a community there. And then it was hard to leave that community 8 years later. But we ended up really loving our time in upstate New York. We were 3 hours north of New York City in Albany, which is the state capital. And I still have friends there that I really loved getting to know while we lived there. But I was always yearning to go back to California. I never expected to be gone that long. And I was totally adventurous and willing to explore. And I had actually spent some of my childhood on the East Coast in Pennsylvania because my mother's family is from Pennsylvania. So we lived there for a while. But then we moved back to California and with the intent to be part of a co-housing community that I had learned about. And that was an amazing thing too, because we ended up living an hour north of San Francisco, where I'd never really spent a lot of my time. I lived an hour south when I was growing up. And it was such a wonderful homecoming to come back to California and then to be part of this incredible project. And our kids were at the time 5 and 10. And they had a wonderful childhood growing up in that community. So they had like 20 kids running around together for those 6 years. And it was magical. It was truly magical. So, and of course, over that time, I was involved in lots of things of my own. When my daughter was born back in New York in 1995, I decided I wanted to have a home birth. So I got involved with traditional midwifery, and the midwife situation in New York at the time was that the state was basically outlawing the option of people having their own home births, and they didn't want traditional midwives to assist in births. And so I got involved on a political level. New York's capital is Albany, and that's where we were living. And so there was a lot of grassroots activity to make it possible for all these different modalities to exist. And so I was, picketing the governor's mansion and writing letters and doing all kinds of things to try and support all that. So there were always things that I was involved with that were meaningful to me, as well as the meditation group that I hosted, and I was involved with teaching meditation and those sorts of things. So I always had my own things to do. And then when we moved back to California, I was very involved with the co-housing development itself. All the families, the 30 families, are all very involved for the first 2 or 3 years before the buildings are actually built, to get it off the ground, because it's a really big undertaking. It's a huge project, to buy a property with 30 families and have them all, have an architect design all the homes together with you, and there are standards you have to all agree with. And then to have it actually developed to do it was in a huge process. A lot of very high functioning people involved in that. And I got to know some amazing families, and my kids, we're still all very close. We all consider each other family, really, because we raised our kids together. And so that time was wonderful. And I worked for a period when my kids were a little older. I went back to work, and I worked in a dental office at the front end, managing the front end. And then I went to work for a nonprofit organization as a bookkeeper. So I did other things, still somewhat part-time. And I did a little more education while I was there. So I was doing my own things too, but it was a very busy time because the co-housing community, even after moving in, required a lot of participation. So we had regular business meetings. We had a lot of decisions to make about all kinds of things. And then my daughter's school, she went to a private school, and there was a lot of parent participation involved in that as well. And it was a long commute. So I was 2 hours in the car getting her to and from school every day. And then my son was homeschooled. So it was just a lot of things, juggling a lot of different things while my husband was starting a second business. And so it was never dull. There was just total, it was like a very sharp growth path on all levels. And then we decided finally, when our kids were teenagers, to move to Europe after the 2008 crash, because the cost of living in California was extreme. And my husband was really ready to kind of not be working 16-hour days anymore. And his mother was here in Germany alone. Her husband had died. And so we decided that it would be good for us to bring the kids here to give them a sense of their German and European heritage. because we'd been here many times to visit, but we'd never actually spent time living in Europe. And so that was also a big, exciting move because we put a lot of things in storage. We ended up shipping things 2 years later in a container, and our car as well, because we had a Prius, and there aren't a lot of Priuses in Germany.
No,
But not
there's
really.
loads here.
Yeah,
Taxi
there's
drivers are Prius
yeah,
owners.
in California too. It's crazy. Everybody's got a Prius in Cal. At one point, out of the 30 families, I think we had 16 Priuses in our co-housing community. But yeah, it was a really big move and very stressful in some ways. But we had already investigated living in community in Germany, and my husband and I and our daughter came here to explore a couple of different communities to see what we thought of that. They're very different than we live in an eco-village. It's a very different experience than living in a co-housing community. This community here is like 30 years old and 35 years old. There were a lot of pioneering people who set this up. It's built on the bones of a settlement that was actually built by the Nazis.
Okay.
And it was the administrative buildings of a prisoner of war camp where they were taking these prisoners and they were manufacturing weaponry in a huge ammunitions factory that's just down the road from the settlement. You know, after the war, it was a repatriation camp used by the British, and then it fell into disrepair after that ended. So in the 70s, it was really falling apart, the whole thing. And these two young men from Berlin bought it with the intent to have some kind of community here. And over a period of time, about, you know, a lot of people came, over 100 people, I guess. They took all these buildings, which were actually, as I said, the administrative buildings, sort of like where the Nazis were living and the soldiers were working and living to oversee this big ammunitions factory. And, you know, so it has a terrible history, but it has really been transformed by a lot of very pioneering people. And it has a real focus on the ecological. Of course, it's an eco-village. So there's a lot of car sharing, and there's a food co-op that's like your own natural food store. So it's an interesting place. There's a lot of very interesting people living here. But it's very different from a co-housing community, in which basically the whole ideal in co-housing anywhere in the world is that you want to know your neighbors. So that's really the bottom line for a co-housing community. And you share a lot of resources in common in a co-housing community. And so basically, you're investing in your own home, but you also share a lot of resources together. And so there's a bit of a risk there, but it's also, you've got some skin in the game. And so there's it's very different than this community.
And what made you move to an eco-village, knowing that you were moving to Germany?
We really enjoyed living in community. And I felt we're going to go all the way across the world to live in another culture. I don't really want to just park myself next to people I'm not going to really get to know and I have very little in common with, you know. And I really felt that it would give us sort of a leg up when we arrived to be connected to something where we would immediately know people who want to know their neighbor, you know, in a general sense.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the idea. And actually, one of the people living in our community in California, he's a writer, and he and his wife had been studying eco-villages in Europe. And when they came back, they were here for 3 months in Europe, and they stayed at this particular community where we live now. And when they came back to California, they did a slideshow. And when I saw this place, I said, oh, wow, that's not far from where my husband's mother lives. It's only 2 hours away. So I thought, well, that might be a good option. We should check that out. And it's actually very rural where we are, which I think is nice because Germany is just lots of villages, one after the other. And I didn't really want to live in a city. So I think that this worked out really well. It's very quiet here. And it's still in the middle of Europe. So I thought, oh, I could go wrong.
No, I agree. And you said that when we first started, the benefits of living in Europe is everything's so close compared to what it was like in America, right? Have you managed to get some travel in Europe?
A little bit. When my husband and I had our 20th anniversary, we actually spent 2 weeks in Spain, in southern Spain, Andalusia. That was beautiful. That was really nice. We've been to Mallorca. We've done sailing trips around Mallorca. My husband is a sailing person. We've done that. We've been to Italy a few times and been to Scotland. Of course, I've been to England many times. Um, we go to ski in Austria. We've been doing that actually for a long time. We've been taking our family there for about 15 years, even from the US, because there's a beautiful little town in the Tyrol in Austrian Tyrolean Alps where my husband grew up skiing. And so he always dreamed that we would have family ski vacations there. And so we started doing that when our kids were still like 10, 12 years old. Most of the time when I've traveled, the last 10 years I've lived here, I'm going either to California or my daughter went to high school in India. So I actually used to go to India a lot,
Wow.
um, to Auroville, where she was in high school for 2 years. And then also to Amsterdam, where she was in college. So it's like, usually I'm kind of going where my family is. So I'm kind of thinking more about where am I going to go in Europe as soon as I can. I want to get out of here, you know.
I think everyone's in the same boat. We're just planning our next trip away as well. Cannot wait.
I bet. Where are you going to go?
Well, we've had a few trips which have been cancelled and postponed. So I really wanted to go to the Philippines with my partner. Alternatively, we might go to Bali. So I've already been to Bali, but we just want to go away for about 4 to 6 weeks, take some time off. He's actually currently writing a book. So I'm also starting to write a book. This is something very new for me. So we thought, why not get away in the nature and just in a quiet space and just have a bit of kind of be in the middle of nowhere and continue on with our work. So that's the plan.
Oh, it's so nice.
You mentioned earlier that you started your own meditation school when you moved to New York. Can you tell us about how you got into meditation?
Yes. Actually, I really had no interest in meditation or anything like that until I was about 21. And I was always interested in mystical subjects from the time I was a child. So I think it was inevitable that eventually I was going to intersect with meditation. But I actually had a very strange mystical dream. I seem to have these prophetic dreams on occasion. And I had a very strange mystical dream that basically the only thing I remember from it was that I needed to find a specific meditation group. And I opened a magazine the next day that had offerings for meditation. I was growing up in San Jose, California. And so we had this magazine called Heart Dance. And I just opened it up, and immediately I saw this one meditation, and I knew that that was the one. And I called this woman up, and it was a free meditation. And so it was not a problem for me to go and learn it. And it's called transmission meditation. It actually was begun in London in 1974 by an esotericist. His name is Benjamin Creme. He's no longer alive. He died at the age of 93 about 4 years ago. And basically, I took to it right away. It was a really powerful, but also very simple form to learn. It's based on basically sort of concentrating on this center, the ajna center, which is a chakra between the eyebrows. So it's a form of concentration meditation, which is really what a lot of schools of meditation start to teach concentration. So in Tibetan Buddhism, it's called shamatha meditation. You concentrate on an object, you concentrate on some one specific thing. So yeah, that was really my entree into that. And then over time, I was given a mantra also to do a personal meditation, because transmission meditation is actually done as a group, and it's done with the intent to serve the world in some meaningful way. So it's not actually undertaken generally as a form of self-development the way that many other forms of meditation are undertaken. And so many people who practice transmission meditation also practice a personal form of meditation at home twice a day. So that was really my entree. And now it's been over 30 years since I started. And yeah, it's transformed my life, really. I think meditation is an incredible and a very powerful tool. The way that I tend to look at it is that each one of us has a core or essence in us, and some people call it the soul or the self. We're not often really in conscious contact with that aspect of ourselves. It comes and goes, you know. And concentration, like meditation that concentrates on something like this gives us more of an opportunity to connect with that source. And that source is connected to everything. So it knows only oneness, it knows only connection with everything. And that's been my experience too, because the more you contact that aspect of yourself, in my experience, the more you express that as well. You express that relationship to oneness, that relationship to your awareness that everything is connected. It becomes more of a reality for you. And that can really affect your life in incredibly powerful and meaningful ways.
How has it impacted your life? You've mentioned it's changed your life, and it sounds like you've got many benefits from it. So how?
Well, it's one thing to talk about the fact that everything is one, and whether you hear it from a physicist or they're talking about the nature of the energetic universe and how everything is interconnected on an energetic level, or whether you're talking about it or you're hearing it from somebody, a Buddhist practitioner who's talking about the fact that everything is one, or a Hindu practitioner, or a yogi, or whatever. You hear these things, and we all somehow deep down know that it's probably true. But the more you are in contact with that aspect of yourself that actually experiences that, the more it becomes a reality for you. So that is really, it's a very profound experience to come to the realization that deep down inside yourself, like you have a really conscious awareness that that is the reality of everything, that we are all interconnected. It's not just an idea anymore. It's not just a mental concept. It actually is a reality for you. And if that's a reality for you, then you behave very differently towards other people. And you understand how this all works. It's an energetic experience. So, for example, I'm somebody who doesn't hesitate to show compassion for others who really have much harder lives than I do, for example. I don't mind talking to someone who's homeless, for example. It doesn't scare me to do that because I see them as myself. It's a very difficult thing, of course, because we don't want to see people suffering, and that's hard for people. They don't want to have to encounter that because it's painful, really. On some level, we know it shouldn't be like this, right? There's what happened to that person? How could that have come about? But the more you are in contact with this essence of yourself, the more you recognize yourself in other people.
You mentioned that it's changed your views, or you behave differently towards other people. Can you explain how that is? So how do you feel more connected to the people around you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the way that I look at this is from the point of view that basically that core or essence inside of you is connected to everything and everyone. So the more you make contact with that essence of yourself, the more you feel that connection in a tangible way. It's not just an idea anymore. It's not just a concept. It actually is a reality for you. And I think that that's one of the things, as we go further on this planetary experiment that we're all on, and we see that, things look really devastating around us, right? We have all kinds of crises that we're facing right now. And it really is that kind of waking up to that reality of our relationship to each other, our relationship to this planet, to nature. It's that kind of waking up that will change the course of that crisis. Until we take responsibility for it en masse as a whole, nothing's going to change. And it requires our awareness, our waking up to that reality. So that's one of the things that I see as having really benefited me a great deal by meditating, is that for me, it's a very real thing. I feel it as, I know it deep down as a reality. It's unquestionable to me. That's the truth.
And how often do you meditate now?
I meditate 1 to 2 times a day for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then I have this other form of meditation I do, transmission meditation. I usually sit for 2 hours, 3 to 4 times a week.
And that's in a group, you mentioned? That meditation's in a group?
It's usually done as a group and of 3 or more people. And because I live in the middle of nowhere and I haven't had an easy time finding others in my area who are interested in this, I've been doing sort of a mental link up with other groups. And now that we have Zoom, many of the groups around the world are meeting on Zoom because they can't meet in person. So that has actually also been lovely because I can connect with my coworkers in the community of meditators that I know. I can connect with them through Zoom in the United States, in Europe, wherever I am, and that's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long did it take you to actually find this connection through meditation that you mentioned?
It's a really good question. I think everyone is different, but my experience was that it was rather quick because in the very beginning, when I first started doing transmission meditation, I only had a group at my home once a week for about an hour and a half. And my husband joined soon after I started this group. And we both, about a year later, we were just astounded by how much it affected us. We really could tell that something had shifted in each of us. And in addition to this idea of being connected, it also really helped us to deal with our own emotional nature, each of us. We felt that it gave us some kind of extra support, that we saw things very differently. Like we were not as emotional, not as struggling with the more difficult emotions like anxiety or stress or whatever. I mean, we just found that we were able to cope much better, and that's many people remark that that's another thing that they experience. A lot of people experience when they meditate. I just finished a project actually as a translator. I have a friend in Munich who teaches, he's a professor at 2 universities, and he started a program 10 years ago to bring meditation and mindfulness practices into the university in 4-credit courses, which is a pioneering effort. And he's had over 2,000 students go through the program. They're working in many different faculties in many different degree programs, but the students had tremendous impact. They felt tremendous impact from these courses. And so he wrote a book about it. It's called the Munich Model, Meditation, Mindfulness and Meditation in a University Context. And it's originally published in German, and the translation is going to be printed in the United States in the next few months. And a foundation has already bought thousands of copies to be sent to universities all over North America and institute the same program. So, he feels that we've got so much focus on the intellect and not enough focus on the intuition, which has also benefited. We grow our intuition through the process of meditation and mindfulness practices. And so, this is really changing a lot. There's a lot of people that you wouldn't expect who are now taking up some of these practices because from a neuroscience point of view, it's also been seen that there are dramatic changes that happen in the brain during meditation. And if people do sustained meditation practices over a long period of time, it has really makes noticeable changes in the brain. So, I can only say from my own experience, it's been truly transformative.
I love that. I think more and more it's becoming more popular as well, especially here and with everything that's been happening in the world with health and wellness and well-being. I think more and more people are experimenting and trying meditation, and the benefits are really showing, or they're being portrayed through social media or websites or programs, anything that it is. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it's good to hear that you've been doing it for a very long time and you're able to share what you've learned and what you've experienced throughout that time.
Yeah, thank you for asking, because it's very meaningful to me, and I love to talk about it, but I rarely do actually. So that's really nice to be asked about it.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and many of the listeners here I'm sure they'd love to know more as well.
It does take discipline, of course, in the beginning. I can't say that I'm always terribly disciplined. I really have to remember and remind myself to sit sometimes, because when I get up in the morning, I usually just get going, and it really does require that you make space for it, like anything. Once you've had the experience of how much it can change you in such positive ways, there are times when I'm sitting in meditation, it is the most blissful thing. So it's not always like that, because the mind is a tricky thing to work around sometimes. But when you're doing it right, in my experience, it's an incredibly blissful experience, and you look forward to it. It changes. It takes time sometimes to get to that, but you don't give up, because that's why it's kind of hard to do it on your own sometimes. It's good to have a community of sorts. And so if there's a center where you can learn, in fact, I can give you another tip, and that is the form of meditation my husband does now is it comes out of the Theravada Buddhist tradition, but it's not actually a Buddhist meditation as taught the way it is. It's taught by a man named S.N. Goenka. And there are these free 10-day meditation courses that you can take. They're often booked, so you have to look far in advance. But all of my family members, my kids have also taken these courses. They are tremendous courses. You learn so much because you're doing about 100 hours of meditation in 10 days.
Wow. That's intense.
It's intense, but it's fully supported. So basically, you really learn how to do it well, and you're really in your own space. It's a silent retreat, and you also are completely cared for and given meals and all this sort of thing. It's very simple accommodations, but it's totally worthwhile because you really learn.
And that's all around the world they do that?
All around the world. I can give you the website. It's www.dhamma.org. Yeah, they're really incredible courses. They teach you so well. It's a different form of meditation. It's Vipassana meditation, but it's a really interesting experience.
No, that sounds amazing. I definitely want to check that out. I think we were even considering it actually as a part of this, where do we go to next? And my partner, he's got a few friends who are currently in an ashram in India, and they go every year for about 3 to 6 months, and he just to do meditation. And my partner said, he was like, maybe I should try it. And I was just thinking, wow, that's so intense. And would it be good? Like, how would it work? And I think it's such a new concept for us to do meditation for that amount of time, as well as stay silent. I like to talk.
I understand.
So it's a bit of a challenge, but at the same time, I'm thinking I would love to try it.
Yeah, actually, there's nothing to lose, really. I mean, I also wasn't sure how that was going to work. But of course, you're going to a retreat, for example, like these retreats I was just talking about. You don't really know anybody anyway. And of course you do end up sort of, sharing some space with people. So most people aren't talking too much, but on occasion you might have to ask your neighbor for something or whatever. But for the most part, it's actually really freeing. You're not allowed to bring a journal. You can't write anything down. You really just focused on the meditation itself. You're taking walks in nature during the break periods and whatever. So, but you're really in your own space. And I have to say, that was a magical experience, especially after being a really intensively oriented parent for as long as I was. In fact, my husband was the one who sprung this on me. He came back from one of these retreats and he said, you have to do the next one. You have to do it. It's incredible. And I thought, are you crazy? I mean, I was like, I don't have time for this. I've got all these things to do. I'm going to give a talk in a week, and I've got to get the kids to school, and I've got all these things to do. He said, I'll take care of all of it for you. I'll do all of it. You have to go to the next one. So I went, and actually, I was pretty impressed by the whole experience. It was really special. So I've been to a few ashrams in India. I haven't stayed there for long periods, but there's a special energy in India. It's very special energy. And I actually really got a lot from my time there. So, for example, maybe you've heard of Sri Ramana Maharshi. I've been to his ashram in South India, in Tiruvannamalai, and that's just an incredibly powerful place.
Wow.
He's been dead since 1950 something, but the energy there is just incredible. And lots of people from all over the world read his teachings and practice the meditation he also taught. And going there, it's a really well-known town because of his ashram. So a lot of Western people go there.
Wow. I would love to do something like that. I think that's probably next for us.
Yeah.
And we'd like to go together as well.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a really nice experience to share. even
Yeah.
though we can't talk, but it would be more just the kind of experience, I think, the spiritualness. I think it would be really nice.
Yes. Yes.
So can you tell us then, what is next for you?
That's a really good question. Actually, this year I was planning already to go into voice work, to read audiobooks, for example. That was something I've often felt that it would be good practice for me to open up my voice and to start using it more. And I think it's symbolic on the one hand, and then it's also um, it's just interesting. It's an interesting field for me. I've spent so many years reading books to my family members, to my kids, to my husband. Um, so I actually really enjoy the whole thing. So it's kind of interesting that the podcasting thing came up for me. So that's kind of for me this next year. I wanted to explore this, and beyond that, as we've already spoken about, I'm looking forward to getting out and seeing the world again. So those are kind of my two objectives for this coming year.
And I would say you've got such a calm and soothing voice. I think I just, when I first heard it, I was like, wow, I just feel really calm and I love listening to it. So I think you'd be really great on podcasts and even audiobooks, as you said.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm one of those people that has really spent my life trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do and where was I going. Because when I was younger, I really had no sense of a plan or a purpose about where to head, what to do. So I think that I'm still working on that idea of, what am I here to do? What am I here to, what is my, I don't really have a career path of sorts. I've always sort of done what was in front of me, but I haven't had this sort of objective thing that many people do about, well, my next task will be that I'm going to be a manager of that particular thing, or it was never, I wasn't really very ambitious in the sense of really wanting a career like that. And so I guess in some ways I've always thought I was an artist. So this is just another way to explore that.
Absolutely. And I'd say you've definitely tackled things that others haven't in their career. Let's say you've got so much energy, calmness, mindfulness. You know yourself so well. You sound very happy, content. And I feel like many people who have a plan, let's say, who are very kind of career driven, ambitious, whatever it is, don't always have that, or they forget to look after themselves. And I do think more and more that's the number one thing we should all be doing. And it feels like you've really nailed that. So good on you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's always a work in progress. Everything is, right?
Yeah.
We're all trying to figure it out, and the grass is always greener. I always think the same thing. I have friends who are career driven people, and I always think, wouldn't that be nice? That would be interesting. So it's always the same. But one thing I didn't tell you that I actually lived in Japan for a while when I was in my early 20s. And that's another place that I really love. I was just there actually only the year before last to see it again after 30 years. And I lived in Tokyo, and I taught English there. And so, yeah, there's so many places in the world that I'd like to spend more time and explore, because I think all of us need to do that, right? I mean, we need to connect with the world. We need to connect with other people and other cultures.
Oh,
Um, you know,
absolutely.
You've been so many places. I'm so
Yes,
impressed by
this
how
is
far
my
you.
priority. Like I just love getting out there and experiencing different cultures, meeting new people, seeing the locals. I love living with the locals. I
Yes.
just have that connection there. I just want to speak to them, even though there's a language barrier. And I just use sign language. And there's something about it that just gives me that sense of kind of freedom and knowing and knowledge. I just love it. Travel is for me the thing that keeps me alive, almost like it just is that fire inside me that just want to keep going and yeah, see the world. So I still feel like there's so much I need to see and I want to see. I'd happily go back to places I've already been to with the connections I've already made to the place itself. You talk about meditation, connections to people, and I feel like I have that with places. And I just
Yeah.
love being in nature as well. So there's not much of that here in London, as you can imagine. So yeah, that's just our next step to kind of get away.
What are some of the favorite places you've been? Just curious.
Ooh, I'd probably say so South America is my favorite continent. I just love the culture and everything about South America, the places, the nature. So I'd probably say Peru is one of my favorites. And then Jordan, I went there recently and I did these countries on my own as well. It was incredible. I know there's two wonders of the world there. You got Machu Picchu and Petra, but just seeing it was incredible. I love taking in all the history. And then I start thinking and seeing how people were living back then, like the Incas, and then you've got the Jordanians who kind of built this massive structure in the caves. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I play that. And in it, you mentioned that you've been to Italy, but Italy is one of my favorite countries in Europe. And so I try and take my mum there every year. Obviously, we've skipped a year because of COVID, but every year I try and take my mum there, and then we go traveling around.
I think that's so wonderful because actually so many people are so focused on the material, right? They want the material security of being able to afford the house they want, and all the perks, all the material trimmings of a successful life. And in California, we have a word for that because the real estate is so ridiculous. Similarly, I suppose, to London.
Yes.
The Bay Area is crazy. And we call it house poor because you put all of your resources into a piece of real estate that you then is tied to the economic situation. So, for example, the house we owned in California, day before the crash, it was worth $500,000. It's a little tiny house. And the day after the Wall Street crash of 2008, it was worth 280,000. So it lost half of its value overnight. So to sell it again, it took a year, but fortunately, because we were in a co-housing community which had a lot of demand, there were a lot of people that wanted to live in a co-housing community. It takes too long to start one. You have to really find them. So we were able to sell it for almost the value of it before the crash. But it's like, yeah, people just can't. A lot of my friends in California can't travel because all of their money is tied up in their lives, in their lifestyles.
And thank you so much for coming on my podcast, by the way. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Really enjoyed it too, myself.
Thank you so much for listening to the Fearless Females Voice podcast. Be sure to join our Facebook group called Fearless Females and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye for now.